Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, November 3rd, 2016. The 108-year drought for the Chicago Cubs appears to be open. Of course, the series was fixed. You know that, as Bill tweets us from Portland, Maine, Daily Co's Radio, being live now. I, Kagro X, David Waldman, and we'll explore the secret memo suggesting that Putin meddled in the World Series. He didn't have any idea whose side he was meddling on, but it doesn't matter just so long as the results are called into question. I assume, I just in fact saw Claire McCaskill, you know her, senator, tweeting, no question that if Trump were a Cleveland fan, he would say that it had been rigged. It was a very exciting game. I did not watch any of the World Series until the very end. I realized, it's Game 7, and although we've had a couple of Game 7s recently, it's a relatively rare event having a Game 7 at all in the World Series. And I believe we were reminded last night by the insane statisticians that it was something like 30 or 38, 34 was the number that they came up with of Game 7s in the World Series. And of course, it got super exciting at the end. I probably picked it up somewhere around the fifth or sixth inning. And it was pretty exciting. Game got tied. The Cubs go ahead. The game gets tied again. And oh my God. And so extra innings and then rain. Just like, oh my God, what else could they throw at me? Why? Because I had made up my mind that was I'm going to bed early. I'm done with some stuff. I want to get some sleep. I'm exhausted. It's time to go to bed early. You know what? Why don't I unplug for a little bit and just watch some TV? I thought I could catch up on one of the shows that I taped, but then I said, World Series. Come on. Game 7. Turn it on, right? Watch. And of course, it was baseball for one thing, so it dragged on and on anyway. But on top of all that, extra innings, and then a rain delay, and there wasn't a long rain delay, but who knew at the time what that was going to be like, and wow, it was weird, and I wondered, what if the rain lasts 108 years, we're going to be here forever, how late will I stay up for this nonsense? Neither of these two teams are I don't really have a team anymore. I guess when I was a kid, we watched the Mets a lot. We watched the Mets and the Yankees, they were always on TV, and, if you're a serious baseball fan, you're supposed to, I guess, hate one and love the other. And I just wasn't a very serious baseball fan. But I don't know. I guess I got into the Mets because, I don't know, a lot of things. All the kids at camp were Mets fans for one reason or another. And I eventually reasoned if I was going to be forced to pick one or the other, I would go with the team that broadcast on a television station based in New Jersey rather than based in New York. That was I figured maybe that's more home team. I don't know which team's stadium was geographically, as the crow flies anyway, closer to home. Neither of them are really particularly close to home. So I went with the Mets. Why not? And there was some camp value to that because the Mets were horrible. And then they got okay, right? So it was a little bit like the Cubs being out of the World Series forever. There was always camp value to being a Cubs fan, and that's gone now, but I'm sure they're happy to trade it for a World Series championship. So, exciting conclusion to the game last night, despite the fact that it was rigged. And other than that, what else is going on in your life? How's your schedule today? Is today a good day for you to have a water heater leak? Because if it is, I've got one for you. Would you like it? How about that? That's happening at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters as well. So we'll get that checked out, and of course we'll want to get that repaired before we take off for the long weekend that we have here in Virginia because they close the schools for Election Day, and we take the opportunity to escape and hide from the world, having cast our ballots ahead of time. Unless, of course, it's one of those elections in which we're actually working. But not this time, although I guess I should have set the time aside to do some volunteer work somewhere for election protection. But I got kids to raise and get them through the public schools, and they expect to have that break away and visit the grandparents. And so we're building, I don't know what, we're building a stronger nation because family values. How's that? That would work for a Republican. I do feel bad sometimes not being on hand for canvassing or working at the polls or even just bringing people water if they're standing in line. But, of course, most of that stuff isn't local to me. But next time, maybe. I'll go around. I don't know what I've been waiting for if I'm not volunteering in this election. But as far as ground game goes, I'm assured of the fact that Hillary Clinton has got this one at least wrapped up in terms of what's going to happen on the ground that day. They've got the people they need. They could always use another hand, though. I know. I do. I feel bad about not being on hand for this. But I was happy to have the opportunity to cast my ballot early and get that done. So you got what you were really looking for, which was the votes. I'm happy to assure you. Okay. A little bit of a roundup on what I can find going on around the country. I mentioned to you yesterday, just briefly in passing, that Josh Warren had sent me a tweet that he grabbed a screenshot of somebody's Facebook page and then tweeted along with the breaking news from small town Massachusetts. Remember, right at the end of the show, I think I mentioned to you that there was a guy who was wearing a ski mask and waving a large knife and then walking around with a Hillary Clinton for president sign, and we were wondering what the hell could that be about. Maybe it's an O'Keefe sting sort of thing. Well, some resolution to that, sort of. I mean, I guess we could call that a resolution to it. He was arrested. That's a resolution. And guess what? There was something a little goofy about this whole thing. He was a Donald Trump supporter. Just sort of kidding about wielding a knife and wearing a mask and supporting Hillary Clinton for president. He doesn't. Story goes like this. Masked man holding plastic knife, as it turns out, which I guess is good. I mean, he didn't stab anybody or even try. I'm probably going to have some auto-playing video to cut off here in a minute. But anyway, holding a plastic knife and a Clinton sign. The sign was real, the knife was fake. Arrested in Pembroke. So here's the word on that one. And do they say Pembroke or something like that? I don't know. It's Massachusetts. With less than a week to go before Election Day, passions and tensions are rising in the presidential race. But on the South Shore, police say one man took things too far. And he did. On Wednesday morning, officers arrested Joe Pesevich. And does he say Pesevich? I don't know. Who cares? A Donald Trump supporter. Donald Trump supporter who was standing along Route 139, which they call Route 139. I don't know. What do they say in Massachusetts? Who cares? I'm obsessing over this stuff. Anyway, he's wearing a mask and holding a plastic knife and a Hillary Clinton sign. And Mobile will be happy to know that there's a Mobile gas station sign in the back, good for branding, behind him in the photo. Drivers call police. Pembroke officers respond and had to repeatedly tell him to drop the knife, which turned out to be a plastic toy. This is, I thought, a clever response. Clever in the sense of, duh, you're an idiot, and no, this won't help you. He says, it's a First Amendment issue to me, says Pesevich. It's not something you should have a gun pointed at you and be shackled over. Sure it is. You're a masked man with a knife. Why would that not be something you should have gun pointed at you and be handcuffed for? But it was a plastic knife. Well, who knew it was a plastic knife? You're lucky they didn't shoot you. If it was a plastic gun and you were black, you'd be shot. What are you complaining about? Anyway, I mean, it'd be nice if the guns weren't pointed at you, but what else are you going to do with this guy? He is insisting, I am holding a giant knife, and I am an ISIS guy, and I am for Hillary Clinton. I know, I mean, that should have been that was probably the tip that they were talking to somebody who was a joker, but you don't know that the knife isn't real. Anyway, he says he was expressing his opinion that Hillary Clinton is soft on terrorism, but police officials say anytime someone appears to have a weapon, they are forced to respond. Folks are very, very sensitive, clearly, to the threat of terrorism, said Duxbury Police Chief Matt Clancy. What is he doing there? I don't know. Is that next door? It got the attention probably that the individual was sort of hoping it would. You could be a little more definitive than that, Chief. But the police are absolutely going to go out and they are going to check on that. Pesovich says the Pembroke police overreacted. It's just sad that what's an obvious parody and a theatrical parody would, almost get me shot, Pesovich said. Pesovich was charged with disorderly conduct. Of course, I would put a little bit of money down on a bet that the guy does not have any problem with that, with guns being pointed at somebody with a fake gun, depending on their complexion and where they are, etc. Certainly the Hillary for President sign is a tip that you're dealing with a nut rather than an actual ISIS operative. But mask and knife and, hey, sir, put it down. Well, no, I'm not going to. Well, and, that's when the guns come out. Not necessarily so much because they're sure the knife is real, but because they need to remind you that they don't know for sure, and it's going to be checked out, and there's a real authority here, and it's not you. But anyway, he learned a sad lesson about the Constitution, I guess. And don't dress up like ISIS terrorists and then be surprised when people say, look, an ISIS terrorist. It's not a good idea. He knows that now. And if they can hurry up and convict him, if they could just get a felony on the guy, maybe he hasn't cast his ballot yet, but I think that'd be too much to hope for. Even though the Cubs won the World Series, and I guess anything can happen. Good morning, Greg. I'm sure you saw the news about the National Pastime Baseball thing that happened yesterday.
I watched it.
I knew you would. Well, I didn't know for sure, but
it was fun.
It was good. I watched that. I didn't watch any of it before. I haven't watched a lot of baseball. I was surprised.
Baseball's great. You got to be rooting for the Cubs, and you got to be rooting for Bill Murray. And
yes, I like Bill Murray.
It was just fun. I mean, 107, 108 years, 109, 130 billion years before you actually get a championship. That's a long time.
I loved lots of the great thing was the trading of stories of what happened or who was alive or what was going on the last time.
Well, it was that and a lot of, of course, on my Twitter feed, it was mixing politics with baseball, which was great.
Yes.
Cubs are up 8-6, but the internals have the Indians up 9-7, that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, they were good. They were coming fast and furious. I was sort of fascinated by just how long it had been. And I'm explaining to my son who was still up, not to the very end, but just these two teams. They've been at it forever.
Lose, they're going to concede. I mean, there were some really good ones there, and of course, it was the same people watching both. But it was just flat out fun, and we need some fun.
Yeah. Well, it's over now. So
it's over now. Let's get back to politics.
All right.
So I'm going to do a very short roundup this morning. I do have the pundit roundup that I had today, but basically, polls are tightening, but weirdly, to the point where a lot of the stuff that's going to come out today, and yesterday for that matter, is going to still be reflecting what happened on Friday with Comey. And that, of course, is a big story in and of itself. One of the big things that happened yesterday in regard to Comey is Chuck Schumer and Barack Obama both announced that they were not particularly confident in him in their various ways. Obama was discreet about it in his usual roundabout way, pointing out that when people put out innuendo stories, that's not a good thing. And Schumer, who has been one of Comey's backers in Congress, just flat out said, I've lost confidence in him.
Well, that will happen from time to time.
Yep, but anyway, so I don't know how golden his future is. In any case, you have a very, very rock-solid polls and votes, that is to say, Charles Franklin MU Law poll with a 6-point lead for Clinton in Wisconsin yesterday afternoon, the one big poll. Everybody was waiting on that because it's such a good poll. And Wisconsin's a pretty good feel for what's going on in the Midwest. And as it happens, a 6-point lead for Clinton in that poll is very solid and suggests that the rest of the Midwest is pretty solid for her too. So again, Trump has to start flipping blue states in order for him to win the election. And the thing is that Michigan, which I think makes most Democrats nervous simply because Michigan polls were not accurate in the Democratic primary. Nonetheless, there's some other important Michigan news that, people don't talk about, or at least factoids about Michigan that people don't talk about that I think, are semi-important.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is that Obamacare is doing pretty well there.
Oh.
So it's not the big factor that the Republicans are. That's one of their 2 or 3 major talking points. Hillary's crooked, Obamacare is awful, and of course the Comey thing, or WikiLeaks, combined together, email. That's the stump speech, and it doesn't work that well in Michigan because actually, although there's a lot of disaffected, angry people there. That's the Macomb County and Michael Moore, pointing out that there's a lot of frustration with trade and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, you do have one of the pillars of the you have to have change not really working as well in Michigan as it does in other states. Arizona has bigger premium rises, for example. And at the same time, there is an Arab American population in Michigan.
Oh, yes.
Probably the largest in the country. Now, many of them are Christians.
True also.
But nonetheless, I just don't think that's a Trump vote.
I don't feel like it is.
And it would be awfully interesting if one of the things that happens in the election is that Arab Americans wind up helping Trump lose.
Thanks.
Yeah, and people of color and women.
Yeah,
and
we owe a lot of debts.
But we do owe a lot of debts because that might be one of the things to stop them. So that part of the Midwest looks fairly good. There was a crummy poll out today with a Trump 1-point lead out of New Hampshire today. There's a Suffolk poll coming later, but Mass Inc. Steve Gonzalez, a very good pollster. It's just that polls like that are including Friday, Saturday, Sunday polling. So a lot of the stuff that you're going to see yesterday and today is going to be peak Comey derp.
Peak Comey derp.
So you have to just keep an eye on the dates of the polls. What would be most helpful is to have November polls. Because the Comey thing, I think, was October 20th, whatever that Friday was. And so if you're polling from November 1st onward, you had a chance to get the shock, get over the shock, have the pushback from the Clinton camp, and then by 4 days later, it wasn't quite the story that it appeared to be on Friday. So polling from Monday onward, I think, is more valuable than, or even Tuesday onward, is more valuable than Friday, Saturday, Sunday polling is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So, having said all of that, and noting that there are some solid polling every day kind of units, YouGov, for example, has Clinton at a 3-point lead, and I think, I don't have it right in front of me, but I think her EVs, or electoral votes, were over 290, 292. And even that, they have Pennsylvania as a toss-up, which I don't think it is. And so I think she's still over 300 EVs as of today. Other maps have her that there as well. So that's the background. But there's no question that some polls are tightening, and we should pay attention to them. We do pay attention to them. It's not that we dismiss them. Where are we at with the trackers? Well, yesterday afternoon is when NOLA puts out theirs, and Clinton picked up a point today. ABC Washington Post is now Clinton +2, so she picked up 2 points. The LA Times, which is, as we all know, Trump favorable, went from Trump 6 to Trump 5, so she picked up a point there. IBD tip is stable. Pay attention to Rasmussen. So the trackers, if anything, are starting now to drift, slightly in Clinton's direction. That's not important in terms of telling you where the race is at. Only that if you're using them for trends and trends only, which is what I use them for. It's not like it's, invariably you can't stop it. Everything is going toward Trump. Not true.
Well, at least that's not true.
Right. So there's that. And now, as we get closer and closer to the election, we have more early voting information. And that's now becoming a really important piece of data to put together with whatever the polls are telling us. So let's start with Michael McDonald's Twitter feed, because He looks at the overall big picture. For example, North Carolina. Early vote mail and in-person. Now for the abbreviations, if you're following along on the internet.
Okay. Yeah.
VBM is vote by mail.
VBM, okay.
EIP is early in-person.
Okay. Yes.
Right? NPA is no party affiliate.
Okay.
That is to say they signed up as an independent.
Right.
Okay. And North Carolina. Democratic vote almost clawed their way back from the week of poll closures.
Okay. Yes.
Yesterday's vote changed from same day in 2012. The Democrats are down minus 0.5%.
All right.
They had a much bigger deficit earlier in the week. The Republicans are up 12.9%. Interesting stat, because in North Carolina, you don't know whether white college women, for example, are part of that. And we do know that the female vote has actually been quite high this year in early voting. Okay. As high as 55, 56% in some of the states. So that's going to be one of the untold stories that will be told when you see what's going on. So keep that Republican vote in mind. And here's the real big statistic, which keeps startling me every time I see it. In North Carolina, the unaffiliated, the NPA, no party affiliation vote, is up 43.6% compared to 2012.
Okay.
Who are they? How are they voting? We don't know. It's a wild card.
True.
Might well be voting Democratic. We don't know.
Well, I hope so. I'm wondering about
I say that because you can't look in North Carolina and get depressed about the early vote. It's actually not that bad, and it might be good. Not. Who knows?
Yeah. I'm actually mostly interested in, I'm intrigued by the idea of women voting early so heavily.
All right, let's see what we have from Michael Bitzer, Bowtie Politics, because he specifically follows North Carolina. And let's see what we got here. He's got some new data from this morning that he's just putting out right now. So North Carolina absentee ballot hit 2.4 million, with accepted at 2.3 million. New analysis trends and additional analysis he's going to put right now on his Old State North Politics blog. So I'll give you that link just so that you could follow along too. This is hot off the presses stuff. Third largest number of ballots coming in yesterday. North Carolina's absentee ballot continues to move ahead of where things stood 4 years ago.
Okay. And
the early voting, absentee or in person, concludes on Saturday. Today's Thursday.
All right.
So we have 3 more days of it.
Yeah,
in total, North Carolina stands at 2,425,475 ballots, and of that, 2.2 million came in person.
Okay.
Okay, it's an 11% increase over the same day totals from 2012. So a lot of people in North Carolina voting.
Is North Carolina pure early voting, or do they also have the early in-person absentee if you have an excuse thing?
I think it's relatively. I have to go look. I don't have the green papers in front of me, honestly. It's a great question. The green papers know everything, but I don't have that open.
Oh, okay. Well, just now I find that it's important to differentiate. I don't think it changes our perception of the numbers. I just I don't want to confuse anybody. We want to be precise in it. But okay, it's a little late in the game now. Next time we'll be ready, though.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can find it. Let's just look up green papers, North Carolina, early vote, and see what they have to say.
Why not? I mean, I don't know. I'm just curious, and it's as good a use of our time as any to be precise in our language.
Yeah, well, okay. We'll get it better by tomorrow.
Sure.
But more stats for us. The total absentee ballot party breakdown, 42% from registered Democrats, 32% from registered Republicans, and 25% from registered unaffiliated voters.
Okay, right.
Okay. Democrats have basically hit what they did in 2012. Republicans are a little up, and the unaffiliated are way up, as I told you. Among the racial composition of all absentee ballots, white registered voters continue to be 72% of the ballot, black voters at 22%, and black voters have been a higher daily percentage and all other races are 7%. So black voters continue to trail where they were in 2012, and white voters are slightly more than where they were in 2012. So if you're a Republican, you have to like that.
I guess. I mean, you have very little else to like, so you might as well like that.
But again, it's the non-affiliated voters that are really going to be the big change. Now, here's the gender breakdown. Women continue to dominate the total absentee early voting, standing at 56% of all the ballots. So I remembered correctly. Both mail-in and in-person. Female voters are 47% registered Democrats, 30% registered Republicans, and 23% registered unaffiliated.
All right.
And male voters are 37% Democratic, 35% Republican, and 28% unaffiliated.
And we have to differentiate. It's MALE voters. Now that we have
white
VBM voters elsewhere.
Yeah. But the point is that that's a lot of female voters.
It is.
And you have to figure that if there are more female voters voting than male voters, by like 300,000, 340,000 votes so far.
Yeah.
That may be a Clinton vote.
Yeah, it may be. There's always a good possibility of that. I guess I'm curious also about whether, I mean, this is an individual thing and I can't paint that broadly about it, but I'm wondering whether there's an additional boost from, we've heard a lot of stories about women who tell pollsters not only that they're voting for Clinton, but that they're not telling their husbands that they're voting for Clinton. I wonder if you go, if you have that kind of tension in your household, or you have some reason to believe that if you go with your husband, you'll somehow be forced to vote Trump, which you won't be. It's a secret ballot. But still, that's not that easy to convince people of if you're living in a situation where you feel threatened. I can't.
Right. I mean, we were talking about this on Twitter yesterday, joking about it, but it's true.
I wonder
somebody
if you go,
tweeted, "Well, I spoke to 3 of my friends, and 2 out of 3 of them, males at work, are voting for Trump."
Yeah. I mean,
and that means that 5 out of 6 of them are voting for Clinton because their wives at home.
Yeah. So I wonder whether people are going, while their husbands are at work and they go and they vote. And then when Tuesday comes around and the husband wants to go vote and they say, oh, you know what? I took care of it already. Hopefully everything goes smoothly from there. And that nobody's forced to go to the polls and only have the poll workers then say you already voted and cause even more trouble for yourself. But I wonder about that. Or at the very least, whether women, there's also, of course, I'm sure a lot of women who say, not only am I anxious to vote and I'm openly voting for Clinton and I don't care who knows it, I can't wait any longer to do it. I'm just so disgusted by this whole thing. And I don't think it works exactly the same way for men. I was certainly disgusted enough to vote immediately when I got the chance. But I could see it being a little more of an imperative for women, sure.
Right. Now, here's another interesting stat out of North Carolina, again, to help put this in perspective. Urban county voters, 55% of the total. Okay. Suburban county voters, 21% of the total.
There are just fewer of them.
And rural county voters, 24%.
All right.
Right, so the urban and suburban certainly dominating there. And new North Carolinians to the state, not born in North Carolina. And in this sense, this is going to kind of feel like Virginia a little bit, Northern Virginia versus rest of state.
Yeah, even if you came from South Carolina.
New North Carolinians to the state are dominating. North Carolina native-born, 43%. Out-of-state-born, 57%.
All right. Yeah, that's part of our New South thing.
Right. So, again, it is a little difficult for all those reasons, to compare this exactly with 2012.
Yes.
But, this is what we know.
This is all we got to cling to at the moment. This is what we have to parse. It's right. Okay.
So that's North Carolina. And then the last piece is the upshot, which is actually using their own polling data.
Oh.
To track early vote. They have a daily tracker there, what the early vote in North Carolina means. They did that big Siena poll, and then they went back and they polled people about have you voted, and if you have, who have you voted for and stuff. So it's an ongoing project.
Okay.
And as of now, already voted is 53-43 Clinton. Yet to vote, they figure splits 46-44 Clinton. And they're still calling it a 6-point lead in North Carolina if the polling holds. So North Carolina, in that sense, has a lot of the tea leaves, but also some of the most complete data.
Okay.
Kind of interesting.
Yes.
Let's switch to Florida, and there we.
Okay. Oh, before we go,
we pretend on Steve Shale for that.
All right, hang on, just a second. I will just update that we got a tweet that says from Bosun Good, who says North Carolina has no excuse absentee. So I guess that's early voting.
Thank you, listeners, for helping to look up some of this stuff while we don't have the opportunity to do that. That's really helpful.
So thanks very much. Okay, and I wanted to get that in before we skip to Florida, but okay.
All right. Skipping to Florida, Steve Shale, November 3rd, Thursday, 5 days out, and President Obama returns to Duval. Steve has a really nice story here.
Okay.
That he tells in 2012. He says, so beginning today with a point of personal privilege, after hitting send on this memo, I am headed to Jacksonville for President Obama's rally. 8 years ago, Senator Obama was in Jacksonville for his final rally in Florida and his first day of the final day. His first of the final day.
All right.
It was also the day he lost his grandmother. After the rally, I sat down to explain where we were in the early vote, because Shale was in charge of twice Obama's reelect. And in Florida. And as I tried to explain it in my overly data-centric way, we're ahead by more than Kerry lost, yada yada, this and that and everything, he said to me, well, what do you mean? What does all this mean? And Shale said to him, it means we won.
All right.
So he leaves Jacksonville. Shale goes back to Tampa, completely freaking out that I just guaranteed him in one Florida, thinking, holy crap, if we lose this thing, he's going to remember me as that jerk in Florida who said we won.
Yeah.
So thank goodness we did.
Well, yes, you have that on your side.
And that's 8 years later. So why Jacksonville? Forgive me for making this point daily, but Florida is all about managing margins. For Democrats to win, we have to run up big margins in a handful of places and hang on. For the GOP to win, they have to run up strong margins in more places. Thus, both sides want to take away one of the other's strengths. And that's how come he's in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Which is a GOP stronghold. The GOP, for example, in the last few presidentials has worked to erode Democratic support in Palm Beach. And for Democrats, the most obvious place to do the same is Duval. It has a large African-American population, so there are votes there to get. I just added that, but that's why. So part of what makes such a great place to work is that it's ever-changing. You can't say, Florida, because when you think you figured it out, something changes. And in 2016, we're seeing two pretty big changes. And now you get to hear this set of initials again, just like we did in North Carolina. The real rise of NPA voters, that's no party affiliate.
Yes.
And the rise of Hispanics. And actually, the two are pretty intertwined. Because a lot of the NPAs are Hispanics.
Yes.
Right? So total ballots cast, total vote by mail is 47%, and total early vote in person, EIP, is 53.3%. And right now, Republicans are 40, Democrats are 39.8 in terms of party registration, and NPAs are 20.2.
All right.
And he thinks right now 52% of the likely electorate has already voted.
Pretty good.
In Florida. Right? So for last minute things to change, it's important. So he goes through county by county in terms of, where we're at and what's going on. But he wants to briefly visit the black turnout piece from yesterday that he did. He uses black voters and not African Americans for a very specific reason. A rather sizable piece of the Florida black vote isn't African American. It's Caribbean American. So he wanted to look at turnout another way. As of the voter-specific data, about 34% of the state is voted, but when you look from an ethnic perspective, 36% whites, 30% Hispanics, and 30% for blacks.
Yes.
And when you keep in mind that the vote-by-mail electorate is white, one would expect the white turnout to be way out in front. And it's not. So if you think about the state as a pie, each ethnicity takes up a piece. The white piece got smaller from 2012 to 2016. The black piece stayed the same. The Hispanic and other pieces got larger. So when you think back to 2012, black voters actually exceeded their voter registration share. That's not normal. And that was Obama.
Okay.
But now
Thanks,
Hispanics
Obama.
are owning more of the pie. So if you're going to look at it in terms of percentages, just keep that in mind. If the black percentage isn't as high as it was a couple of years ago, that may well be because the Hispanic percentage is getting much larger.
Oh. True.
Okay, so he says Clinton doesn't need 08 or 2012 turnout. She needs black share of the electorate to approach its share of registered voters. So if you have 20% black voters in registered voters, you want 20% share. And it doesn't matter whether it's higher or lower than 2012. You just want it to match what the registered voter percentage is. And when you look at black turnout today, as well as how the share has grown since the start of the in-person early voting, it's trending well. It's getting toward that goal. So he's not that worried about, oh my goodness, what's the problem with black voting in Florida? He thinks it's on track.
All right, well, that helps explain things. I mean, that's the only sensible way of measuring it. How many have you got? Oh, okay. And how many of them have voted?
And then one
good.
other last
Okay.
piece. Because he says it doesn't get the attention it deserves. And this is a political term. Maybe it has to be explained. The Republican early leads have been built not completely, but in part by cannibalizing their own election day vote. Cannibalizing feels like a throwback term. What it means is if you were going to vote and you're an absolute definite likely voter and you were going to vote on election day and you get so jazzed up as a Republican about the Comey announcement, last Friday, you go out and vote early. That's not a new vote for Trump. That was always going to be a vote for Trump.
True.
So the conventional wisdom is the GOP wins election day, but honestly, specifically in 2008 and somewhat in 2012, they won election day because we were done.
Mm-hmm.
We won because they won election day not because they were better at it, but because they had a larger pool of highly likely voters left to vote because we got our people out early.
Yeah.
Okay, in 2016, they have gotten a larger share of the traditional election day voters to vote early.
Mm-hmm.
But Democrats have more 2012 voters left to vote than do Republicans. And in other words, the Democrats are pretty much matching what the Republicans are doing, but they're doing it with new voters.
Ah. Well, yes, that would
So
be...
the regular Democratic voters are still there. And so that's another reason why the state is looking okay.
I like it.
So Democrats can take heart that Miami and Orlando continue to be strong. And with that, I'm off to Jacksonville. Talk to you all tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
So he can't, at this point, turn and say, okay, we won. It's probably closer than it was in 2008. But it's really not looking bad at all. And so a lot of the stories about, well, things in Florida aren't exactly what you want, as we get closer and closer to the end of voting there, it's actually looking pretty decent. So there we have those two big states, Florida and North Carolina, arguably definitely swing states. Mm-hmm. But the early vote, I'm not talking about polling now, I'm talking about the early vote, looks okay for Clinton. Certainly she's got, it's not unfair to say that this isn't settled the way it might be in Nevada. But those two states are certainly looking competitive, and they're states that very much in it, regardless of what the polls say, and the polls aren't bad at all.
All right. Yeah, I'll take it. I mean,
and then you go look at sites like 538, and they say, well, we're going to put it in the pink column, and we don't know, and it's not, it doesn't feel that way when looking at the early vote compared to the polling data. And part of the reason for that is polling data is flooded by Republican-leaning pollsters like CNN, which thinks that Nevada is 6 points in Trump's favor, which is completely garbage. And you hate, cherry picking and throwing out polls, but you got to scratch your head and say, there's a lot of mixed data here. And I will say in Nate Silver's defense, because you have that kind of mixed data, the early voting information doesn't exactly match what some of the weird polling is matching. The Wisconsin poll, which is very solid, Clinton being up 6, doesn't match a New Hampshire poll that says that Trump is up 1. And so if Nate builds extra uncertainty into his polling model, frankly, because there's a lot less polls this year than there were 4 years ago, that's understandable. Clinton's still ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can accept the result. It is interesting, though. I know you mentioned yesterday that there's just less polls, and I guess you have to do something if you're, once again, just like polling, if your universe is smaller, you're less certain of the outcome. If your universe of polls that you're looking at for doing your aggregation and averaging, you're going to be less certain there, too. But, well, okay. I don't know. I guess we're just about out of time for parsing them and speculating, and it's all going to be counted on Tuesday.
Yeah, but again, I guess one of the points I'm making is that I look at the trackers every day. It's nice to see them. I think some of the LV, that is not EV. We're not talking electoral votes. We're talking about likely voters. I think some of those screens are a little bit too tight, and besides, a lot of people have already voted.
Yeah.
So we'll see where things stand. And as we get, it's Thursday. So when we get to Friday, when we get to Saturday, Sunday, when we get to Monday, we're going to have a lot of information about people who have already voted, and it's not polling. And the already voted stuff is just more solid. It's just that you don't always know who they voted for.
Yeah.
Until Election Day when the votes are announced. But you get a sense, if African Americans are up or where they need to be in a given spot, you can pretty much bank on it that those are Clinton votes.
Sure. Well, I don't mind parsing it. It's sometimes
you can assume that 90% of each of the parties is going to vote for
yes.
as a thumbnail. But the fact of the matter is, you still have white college graduates on the Republican side who the Republican number from urban areas may be up, and it may be 56% women, and they may not be Trump votes.
Yeah. It's a fun game, I guess, and then it all falls apart on Tuesday, and we have to figure out
then we count,
do all the real counting.
And then we see, but I'm not looking at the news as being depressing.
Yes, well, that's
I'm looking at it as being, cautiously optimistic. Obviously, that one doesn't want to get ahead of the data. Mm-hmm. But, not bad. And, look, if the trackers decide to turn around and start moving in Clinton's direction, that's okay. I'll take it.
Yeah. It's absolutely necessary to do. Otherwise, all you can do is just is sit and worry. It's a good thing to do to parse the polls.
Right. This is the week you turn off Morning Joe and stop listening to them.
Well, that's always a good idea. But this would be a particularly good time to do it. But if things have got you nervous, and they do because you're listening to this show, and we can tell, I don't have to parse that deeply to figure out who you're listening.
This is an important election, and people really want Trump to lose and also Clinton to win.
And if
it's going to bother you. It's like watching the baseball game yesterday, and it's close and you're enjoying it, but still, until it's done, it's not done. Yeah. And that last out, a lot of people on the tips of their toes and standing up and waiting for it, and it's until it's done, it's not done.
Yeah, and it was damn close.
And in this case, rain delay and tie,
So if you just need, it's like a cup of coffee.
We have to have penalty shots.
Right. Oh, that would be something. How would they do that in baseball? It's just like a home run derby?
I don't know how they do it in baseball, but in politics, you go to the House.
Yes. Well,
a lot of jokes about that, too. What if the House decided the game?
Good question. I don't know where they'd come out on that one.
They'd come out on the Cubs owner's side, I would think.
Yeah?
He's a Republican.
Yeah, okay. I don't know anything about the ownership of, probably of either team, but okay. I'll take your word for it there. Sure.
I'm thinking they're 1%ers, whoever they are.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I guess you could look at how much money they had given to political campaigns and figure it out just like any other leadership race.
Right. In any case, thanks so much for indulging me this morning. That's the data we have to bring to you. And there's more stories in the Pundit Roundup today for those who are interested. We got some stuff about white nationalists there and we also have a ton of data from some Republican data analytics firms. There's a big graphic at the very top of the Pundit Roundup, which is looking at how the GOP looks this year compared to 2012. And if Democrats are doing better because they take the GOP numbers minus the Democrats. So if Democrats are doing better, it's going to be a minus number in red. And if the Republicans are doing better, it's going to be a black number with a plus sign. For example, rural voters. In 2012, for the GOP was plus 18, and this year it's plus 25.
Okay.
Urban voters, minus 24 in 2012, and 2016, minus 30. So urban voters are a little bit more Democratic and rural voters are a little bit more Republican. There happens to be more urban voters than rural voters, but that's okay. Not by huge amounts in that sense. But look at the suburban vote. The suburban vote in 2012 was plus 11 GOP, and this year minus 4. That means that the Democrats are winning the suburban vote. They won the suburban vote in 2008, but they didn't in 2012. That was Republican.
Right.
But this year they're winning it again.
Well, okay.
And that's just one example of where that data goes. Here's some more. The non-white vote compared to 2012 is actually 5 points less for Democrats this year. It was minus 60. Now it's minus 55. So we'll see if that gets shored up as the election comes around. That may not, again, a lot of this data may not include new voters, so it's hard to say. But black vote was down, and not surprisingly, Obama, again, was historic. It was minus 90 for the GOP in 2008. And for comparison's sake, in 2000 and 2004, it was minus 74. So it was 74 points in favor of Democrats in 2000 and 2004. By 2008, with Obama running, it was 90. And in 2012, 87. Not shocking there.
No.
First black president, historic, all that sort of stuff. This year it's 77. It's back to where it was in 2000, 2004, maybe a tad better. But the Hispanic vote. 2000 was minus 27. In other words, Bush was, doing fairly well in keeping that relatively small number. And in 2004, Bush kept it to a minus 22 for Republicans. In 2008, it was minus 36. In 2012, it was minus 33. But this year, it's minus 46. It's so, in other words, Clinton is running 19 points better than George Bush did in 2000.
All right. The numbers, what a soup it's getting to be. I need some paper.
Yeah, but just to give you an idea, I mean, where are the big changes? The big changes are in the Hispanic vote compared to 2012. It's in the suburban vote for 2012. It's white women college. That was a group that was plus 5 for Republicans in 2012, and now it's minus 17. You can pick out these specific areas and say, this is a big change from 2012. And, just as comparison, college men also plus 19 for Republicans in 2012, only plus 2 now for Trump.
Yeah.
And college women plus 5 for Romney, minus 17 for Trump. And the non-college white women, it's only a 5-point difference. Right? Plus 16 for Romney, non-college white women, plus 21 for Trump. So he gains 5 points with non-college women, but loses 22 points with college women. Just as an example to give you an idea of how this breaks out.
So
and these sorts of comparisons to previous pollings give you an idea of where the parties are going. It's not just where the election is going. But if this is the support for the nominee, where are the parties going to be after the election? And this is one of the reasons, why it's so interesting. And again, the kids are all right. In 2012, they were 19 points in favor of Obama's reelection. And in 2016, they're 25 points in favor of Clinton.
But
it's the plus 65s that are,
Right, and those people are the same. But we keep swapping kids. That's the difference.
But, the kids have had enough with all this nonsense.
They don't hear us. It's all right.
Yeah, they are all right. So again, if you want to deep dive into some of the data, we do have that, and we'll just leave it there. Pundit Roundup's easy to find. It's over at dailycoast.com, and it's the graphic that leads the page, so it's easy to look at. And we'll just leave it there. A lot of data today, but it's a data-intensive kind of time. Yeah. Everybody wants to know what's going on.
Yes.
And there you are.
And they want to know why it's happening.
Exactly. So take care. Thanks for listening. Thanks for indulging me. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. This is the last Thursday before the election. And tomorrow will be the last Friday before the election. We'll be back. We'll do it again. And we'll go from there.
Okay. Thanks very much, Greg. I got one more shot at this before we give up the mic until it's all over.
Right. Now, again, for listeners, we're not here Monday, Tuesday, correct?
Right.
Okay. So I guess we'll do our predictions tomorrow. What else do we have?
I mean, I don't know what else we could do. We could try and, I don't know. We're going to put something together. Hopefully we can give you something new for Monday and Tuesday, but it can't do it live, I don't think.
Right.
But yeah, if you change your prediction, you can tape it and send it to me.
Yeah, I'll tape it to the computer so everybody.
Okay. Yeah. Just put
a little actual physical post-it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Put it on.
Alrighty. Take care.
Thanks very much. You do the same, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow. Okay. Wow. Grand Central Station with the phone calls this morning. I wonder if any of them are the plumber coming to tell me that they were coming during the time window when I told them they were not allowed to come. We will find out. Okay. Parlio asking some questions from way overseas, just sort of weirded out a little bit by the early voting data that is out there. Says, seems weird to me that early vote totals are announced before Election Day is finished, which is weird, but of course they're not actually announcing vote totals. They're not counting any votes early. That's not what's happening. However, they are asking people in the course of ordinary polling whether they have already voted, and depending on what, I guess they ask anybody who has already voted, well, are you willing to tell us who you voted for? And even if they tell you, that's not a result. That's just still a survey, and they could be lying or mistaken or God only knows what. If you ask enough people that question, someone will actually give you the wrong answer. And maybe several people. If you ask enough, they will give you the wrong answer, and sometimes it'll be, I want to lie about who I voted for whatever weird reason. And actually, sometimes, if you ask thousands upon thousands of people, people are weird, error-prone, stupid, all kinds of reasons why this would happen. But statistics, it's just what it is. You know, you ask thousands and thousands of people who they voted for, someone will accidentally tell you the wrong person and then say, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. Why did but you're already gone from the phone or whatever. But their initial response, I don't know. I don't know why that is. It just is. But yeah, second comment on it that Parlio made. So the early voting numbers, I said, they're not counting the votes. They are only talking about who says they've voted already, what are the demographics that we know about that person from the interview, and who do they say they voted for. Still seems weird. He says, and those early voting numbers are just exit polls or similar. They're regular polls. I guess they count, they're similar to exit polls in the sense that the respondents say they have already voted, but they're obviously not being taken at the exits of the polling places, nor are they being taken on a day when you can assume that everybody has either voted or they don't count, like a regular exit poll would be. But so here's the second comment. These EV numbers are just exit polls are similar, or are they official demographic info of voters? Still seems weird. It does seem a little weird that you have to deal with the fact that some people have already voted, and you want to count their data as somehow being more solid, but I don't think anybody really does. I mean, I guess even statistically, even though you know that some people are actually going to give you the wrong answer, intentionally or unintentionally, you can still probably guess that data is more reliable than before the fact. Are you going to vote? Are you definitely going to vote? And who are you going to vote for? Because there's more reasons why a person who says they're definitely going to vote won't actually show up to vote than there are the number of there's more of that going on than there are people who accidentally tell you, yeah, I voted for Trump. Oops. I mean, the other person, Clinton. I don't know why I said Trump. It's got to be rare, but eventually it's going to happen. But on the other hand, who are you going to vote for? Have you voted yet? No. Who are you going to vote for? Trump. Are you definitely going to vote? Absolutely, 100%. I've voted every election of my life, and nothing's going to stop me this time. But, step off the bus wrong and break your ankle, get hit by the bus, get sick, your polling place explodes. I don't know. There are any number of things that could prevent you eventually from casting that ballot. So, I don't know. I guess there's some possibility that people who report having early voted, that's true too. They could also have said, yeah, I voted already. Why did I say that? I didn't vote yet. Or I got my, maybe I got my absentee ballot in the mail, and so I said yes, and I haven't mailed it back yet. I don't know. Could be any number of reasons. But it's still not vote totals. That's a different thing. They do not count their actual votes, even though they've been cast and banked, and they could, I guess, theoretically come up with a mechanism for counting and banking the counting of them early. Nobody wants to mess with that. All the counting gets done on election night, and all of the information we have about who's voting early and what they're doing and why, and the information we have about whether they're Democrats or Republicans in states that keep records of such things, that sort of information is always available on Election Day, and election campaign workers very frequently check that information on Election Day. You'll have precinct level workers will go by and look at the books essentially and say, we have 2,500 registered voters in this precinct. And I mean, in states where they keep the records of these things, you'll know what the breakdown is: Democrat versus Republican versus no party affiliation versus whatever else they've got. And you can ask, how many people have voted today? And the elections officials will tell you that. And you say, we got 2,500 people registered in this precinct, and, 800 of them have shown up already. It's 11 o'clock in the morning, and you get some sense of what kind of, they measure that. What was our goal for getting out the vote? How are we doing versus that? Did we expect to have more people out by 11 o'clock than this, or are we beating our goals? And, how does it square with our plan for getting people out? We thought we would get 1,100 of them. We already got 800. That leaves, 300. Maybe that means that one of the vans that we had scheduled, we had 3 vans for giving people rides to the polls, but we're doing so well, we could spare one of those vans, send it over to the precinct where they're below their numbers, that kind of thing. And you can abstract information as best you can from all that. And what they won't tell you is, what the votes were. They'll give you every other piece of information that they can give you. How many people have shown up? Occasionally, I don't know whether they parse it. So it's available information. I just don't know whether they give it out. Whether you can go and say, well, okay, of the 1,100 people who have showed up, or the 800 people who have showed up this morning, how many of them are registered Democrats? How many of them are registered Republicans? I mean, that would be public information, but I don't know whether they bother tasking election day workers with doing that much. I guess by computer, the computerized precincts, you're able to do that a lot faster. But I don't know. And I guess every state has their own regulatory scheme about what sort of information their election workers can be queried for, what sort of queries they will respond to, and different rules about access that they give to partisan campaign or party officials to access the public information on it, either themselves or to query it through election workers. And I don't know whether it's always a matter of statutorily regulating access to it, or I'm just seeing different levels of ground game in different places. But back in, in New Jersey and the Atlantic Northeast, where elections are machine driven essentially and down to a science, you very often have precinct level workers and ward level workers who know how many people have shown up at any given time and are also able to see either access the list of who has showed up and who hasn't. And they won't tell you what their vote was, but you will also know how they're registered. And you have a list of all the registered Democrats in your precinct. And they'll give you a list, or you can parse out a list of who has already checked in or requested an absentee ballot or something of the sort. And of the absentee ballots, how many of them, I suppose they could give you the information on whether they've been returned or not. I'm not sure whether that's always available. But from that, you can tell a lot of things. I know that there are 1,700 registered Democrats here. I know that 800 of them have already showed up to vote. That's fantastic. I know the names of those who haven't, and those names go to the Get Out the Vote phone bank back at the precinct office, and you call those people and remind them to vote. And sometimes they have that information, and so they can very sharply target those calls. And sometimes they don't get that information, and so they call their entire list. Or sometimes the information doesn't get to the callers all that quickly, and you get called several times even though you've already voted. But if you really have a machine well-oiled and operating properly, especially in some of these places where they divide things up so closely, in the Northeast, they can get right down to the level of, all right, well, we probably know what's going on here. We know who's been to the polls and who hasn't. We know what their voting history is. We know what their registration is. And we know what to do with them. If it's a registered Democrat who skips elections and skips midterms, they're going to need a lot more work to get them to the polls. If it's a regular registered Democrat who's never missed an election, they could use a phone call, perhaps, just to let them know that their local Democrats are still thinking about them. But they probably don't need much more than that. It's just that they're tied up at work. They have not forgotten Election Day. Other people are more prone to this thing, Election Day forgetfulness, or just simply staying away. Anyway, I don't know. I thought you might find that somewhat interesting, although it may just be the same everywhere, for all I know. All right. Let's see. Moving on to a couple of other topics. Let's see. I just saw, I got a hold of what looks like it's numbered, so I guess it's officially a tweet storm. That's it. You put numbers in your tweets, and there's more than two of them. It's a tweet storm. Igor Volsky has been following, he's also been very active on the gun issue. I've been very interested, I think, in gun fail and et cetera, but it appears he's been working on a gun issues project for the Center for American Progress Action Fund for quite some time. And he has a election day, election protection / guns, because they now overlap as an issue, tweet storm. And it begins with this, the one unnumbered one. He says, well, I'm feeling nervous about Election Day and the violent rhetoric that will have preceded it. The unprecedented fear-mongering scares me. And I have to agree. I've been talking about this, as you know, if you've been listening to the show, or if you're my friend Paul and you had this discussion with me yesterday off the air. There's a private show going on, ladies and gentlemen. I have to disclose that to you. But we talked a little bit about what my expectations were for voter intimidation and the guns at the polls on Tuesday. I anticipate, once again, with just enough people getting involved in this and the weird misinformation and just bad information, period, that's out there, and the way people tend to justify the things that they do with guns or for any reason. I mean, like we read this morning about the guy, not guns, not even a real knife, plastic knife. He's sure that the plastic knife is a protected First Amendment statement. I don't think you can be sure about that one, but, you know, a guy like that will waive the Constitution and say free speech, right? And then, you know, the lawyers in the room say, oh, but that's such an enormous body of American jurisprudence. How could you possibly? Right? Is a knife speech? Is a fake knife speech? Is a fake knife speech if it's obvious parody? There's a million different ways to go on that. But no, for him, Constitution says X, and so therefore X. I'm confused as to why I'm being arrested. Similarly, guns at the polling places actually will be an issue. And once again, the laws of large numbers and statistics tell us somebody is going to do something dumb with a gun on election day related to the polling places, and it's just a question of what kind of thing is it going to be. There will be a lot of people who bring guns with them either to their own polling place actively because they think that they're protecting the vote or protecting their own vote, or they think they'll be intimidated. There will be people who don't really think they're going to be intimidated per se, but who bring their guns to prove the point that they're Second Amendment enthusiasts and their reading of the Second Amendment says I have to be allowed to bring my gun everywhere, even though most states have explicit statutory prohibitions against bringing your guns into a polling place. They'll simply claim those statutes are unconstitutional, and who knows, eventually they may be right, but they're not at the moment. And but to them, the rest of the world is pre-wrong. This is a concept I've actually discussed before. And they're pretty sure that one day that'll be overturned, and so therefore there should be no prosecuting of them now, and that's not the way law works, but okay. But there will be people who forget that they're armed, believe it or not, because that happens every day. But even though, of course, one of the basic rules of firearms ownership and use and carriage is that you absolutely, positively never, ever, ever can allow yourself to forget where that gun is and what condition it's in, ever, because it's just too damn dangerous to do something like that. But they do it all the time anyway. Proof being... pardon me, the 50-plus people every week who swear on a stack of Bibles when the time comes that they just forgot that they had a gun with them at the airport. Again, there's your law of large numbers for you. Everybody knows you can't bring a loaded gun with you onto a plane. Everybody knows you're not supposed to forget that you have loaded guns on you if you're a responsible gun owner. Now, if everybody is a responsible gun owner, and statistics tell us that that can't be true either, but supposing you just say that it is, what do you do with that? I mean, how often will people just simply walk into an airport and say they forgot? Now, could they be lying? Sure, they could be lying. It's a line that everybody delivers. When they're caught, right, you just say, I didn't remember that I had the gun on me. And that might just be a flat out lie, but very often it turns out to be true. And sometimes there's some weird circumstances surrounding it. Like, I've brought a bag with me that I haven't used in a long time, and there was a gun in it, and I forgot that. And it's not that much better than just forgetting that you put a gun on that morning, because in the end, a gun is a gun. The gun doesn't care whether you forgot about it or not. But really, believe me, I sound like Donald Trump there. The stories are out there. The TSA trades them, and reports them every week. And there hasn't been a week, I don't think, as long as I've been doing gun fail, I don't think I've certainly never seen less than 30 people a week get caught by the TSA. And the average seems to be around 50. I've seen as many as the high 60s and maybe even the low 70s in a single week, but never below 30. And I guess that's just your law of large numbers thing there. If you don't, maybe that'll help you believe that there really will be people who just tell you the wrong answer accidentally about something as basic as who they voted for. Anyway, Igor Volsky. Back to Igor. He's been nervous about what's happening at Election Day. I think people will show up. I think there's also going to be people standing outside of polling places pretending they're monitoring for fraud, who will bring their guns, whether they will bring the big AR-15s on shoulder straps, I don't know, but there will certainly be some sidearms there. But Volsky has this to say about it, and we'll get to the tweet storm itself. One being, we've never heard a presidential candidate, a POTUS candidate, as he says, say Second Amendment people can stop his opponent and promise to, quote, lock her up if he's elected. True. 2, we've never heard a POTUS candidate call on supporters to fan out across certain neighborhoods to help prevent voter fraud. 3, at the same time, Trump is warning supporters that Hillary would take away their guns and tear up the Second Amendment. So, number 4, it's a toxic situation. Hate rhetoric plus lies about gun confiscation plus angry poll monitors equals guns intimidating people at polling places. No? Maybe. Number 5, particularly scary since firearms are very accessible and gun sales are soaring, in part, I would say. But he says, as a result of Trump lying to people about confiscation. Number 6, and I only say in part about Trump lying to people about confiscation because Trump is far from the only person doing that lying. So only part of it can be attributed to him. But certainly people lying about confiscation definitely drives gun sales. No doubt about that. Number 6, there have never been more guns in this country, and we have never heard more rhetoric intended to incite violence. Number 7, that's why, and here's a Twitter account for you, at Guns Down America. That's why Guns Down America is launching a nationwide voter protection campaign to keep guns out of the voting booth and keep voters safe. Number 8, we're running ads on Facebook, Twitter, and mobile phones encouraging voters who see people with firearms to text Guns Down to 91990. How do you like that? The number 9 tweet in this tweet storm, just to add another 9 to the picture, is illustrated with a photo of, well, who knows who they are, but your average, everyday weirdos who like to show up in body armor with their ARs. And then this guy, he looks to have an AK rather than an AR-15, an AK-47. But 3 sunglassed, body armor wearing, assault rifle bearing folks giving a press conference of some kind in this photo. Anyway, number 9 of our tweet storm says, we need to guarantee hashtag gun-free polls so that voters aren't intimidated and can exercise their franchise. Of course, the gun enthusiasts respond to that by saying, now you're going to invite mass murder at the polls because they're gun-free zones, etc., etc. Now, there haven't been any mass murders at the polls that I know of, and this despite the fact that they have largely been gun-free zones to this point, but that doesn't matter. It's just an opportunity. Now people will be reminded that it's gun-free, and it will probably remain gun-free, except for the people who bring their guns because criminals, who are not them, don't obey signs and will bring guns. So in anticipation of that, I will bring my guns. Never mind that makes me a criminal. It doesn't, because I'm a patriot, not a criminal. The end. You can tell because I have a tattoo on my arm, as this guy in this picture does. It says, we the people. So there you go. I tattooed part of the Constitution on my arm. How could I be a criminal? Number 10 of the tweet storm. Reports of guns at polls will be sent to the Election Protection Center. They'll give legal advice and report instances of intimidation. And I guess that's a good thing. They'll be swamped, I think. And local constabularies, likewise, will be swamped as well. There are a lot of states that they really just have not settled yet what the rules are going to be. And I differentiate as between the rules and the laws here. The laws are what they are, and they're not getting changed. But the rules, I guess, would include not just formal interpretations of the law, but the way that those laws will be handled and interpreted on the ground by law enforcement officials and elections officials as well. There are a lot of states that have no particular rules about guns at the polling places because it's just never really been an issue. It's pretty rare in the modern era to have a presidential candidate say, bring guns with you to the polls. Mostly they refrain from doing that. And I don't even know whether Trump has really actually said that, like you should carry a weapon with you into the booth when you vote. But he is certainly making it clear that he wants armed people watching others at or around the polls. But there's going to be a lot of problems. Hopefully they'll sort themselves out at the local level. But, part of the problem will be, of course, people who are bringing their own guns and want to wear them on their hip in the booth and see no reason why they shouldn't be allowed to, because their interpretation of the Second Amendment is, I can do this. And you'll find that there are election workers that say, but there's a local ordinance that says the polls are gun-free zones, or you're voting in a school, which is a gun-free zone, or whatever, but some people will just say all of that is invalid and as against my interpretation of the Second Amendment, and you all have to get out of my way, and anybody who says otherwise is a traitor, and it says I can execute them. I mean, there are people who actually believe stuff like this, so you'll run into problems like that. You'll run into problems with people who normally wear guns openly or concealed, who they don't forget they're armed, but it doesn't occur to them that entering a polling place is something special and different, and they won't bother checking in any way about whether or not they are allowed to wear their guns, and they may be spotted and they'll be asked to remove them, and they will say, yes, good point. Now that you bring it up, I find it quite obvious that you would not be permitted to wear a sidearm with you into the polling place. Of course, that could be viewed as intimidation of my fellow citizens, and I feel terrible about that. Give me just a moment. I'll comply. I will remove my weapon and store it safely locked in my car outside, or I might even drive all the way home and store it there and come back, just to be even more safe. And in so doing, will accidentally shoot themselves as they transfer their weapon peaceably from their holster to a lockbox, whether it's in their car or at home. There's going to be some of that too. Hopefully that won't actually happen on Election Day, but there's always the chance of that. But there will be people who are willing to comply and will have problems. Or there'll be people who are willing to comply, but they arrived at 7:55 and they're not sure whether they're going to get the chance to cast their ballot if they disarm, and so that will cause problems too. In addition to which, you will find people like the guys in the photo who feel like they are responding to the request made by Donald Trump for them to watch the polls, and they'll feel like that's something that everybody else has to get out of their way for because a presidential candidate asked them to do it. And in their mind, presidential candidates bear some, their requests come under color of law somehow, because after all, being an official candidate for president from one of the parties, they view, and in their minds, they confuse these things sometimes and say, well, that's an official request. Well, there's nothing official about being a candidate. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't imbue you with any authority. You have to win first, and then even then, you got to be inaugurated or sworn into office for those. Even a legal request to bear any legal authority. But never mind all of that. That's too complicated for them. An official nominee told me I should watch the polls, so I'm here with my gun to watch the polls, and the polls are in there, so in I go. Oh no, wait a minute, hold on a second. You're not allowed to go in there. You can't do any politicking, certainly you can't do any campaigning within 100 feet of the entryway to the building that the polls are in. And that's another source of irritation every year, even without the guns, right? Well, I know vaguely that the law says that I have to be 100 feet away from the polls, but I am 100 feet away from the polls. No, you're not. You're right at the door. Yeah, but the polling station is at least 100 feet into the heart of this building. Well, so what's the rule? And I think in most places it's pretty uniform, but usually they say, well, 100 feet from the door into the building. Once you're in the building, you're in a polling place. It doesn't matter if you have to walk down a 400-foot hallway to get to the voting machines. The building is the polling place. Oh, yeah, well, show me in the Constitution where it says that. Yeah, you're going to get things like that. And you're going to get things like that. And it's going to be a local election official who's an official for the day and who is otherwise a local person just like anybody else with no particular legal authority, who will come out and say imagine telling people who are there with AR-15s, right? You can't be here. You have to move over to there. Well, no, I don't. I'm 100 feet from the polling machines. I know, but the law says you have to be 100 feet from the door. Oh, yeah? Well, who's going to move me? I think you're wrong. I think you're making that up. You're going to show it to me on a computer screen and say that's the official, quote-unquote, official election office website? How do I know you're not forging that? And you tell me, and I'll only obey the authority of the local sheriff. Okay, well, we'll get the local sheriff. In some cases, of course, your local sheriff is crazy, and he's going to be no help to you. So we're going to have situations like that, and I guess it's a good thing that we warn people that that may happen in advance, and it's a good thing that there are things that you can do if you see it going on. So follow along with the account at Guns Down America on Twitter, and remember that you can, if you see this happening, text, and you should take a look at Igor's tweet storm, and you'll see it, and you'll find perhaps the ads on Facebook, Twitter, and elsewhere, encouraging people who see people with firearms to text guns down to 91990. I'll just retweet that so you can all pick that up, and we'll try and include that for you in the daily roundup of our show that Scott Anderson helps us prepare after the fact. Okay, let's see. That actually occupied considerably more of my time than I thought it was going to, but that's the story of the show. That's what we do here. All right, let's dive into Pocket and other tabs that I have been holding open, and tell another part of the overall story of this election. Here's one that I have open just because I saw it fly by on Twitter, and I love to do this. From Philly.com, this story, like many others we've heard, or that I've seen anyway, during the election cycle, some of which I have not yet reported to you. But there's this one. After Delco raid, that would be Delaware County. Get it? Delco. After Delco raid, focus widens on voter registration group. I think you probably can guess where this is going. But before I jump into that, I just wanted to note Kate Sherrill, who a frequent contributor to the show via Twitter, says, I have been that election official before, had to argue a bit, but no guns involved, was ready to call 911 if needed. Yeah, those arguments happen everywhere all the time. And it's usually just the local local activists who, and they'll argue with you endlessly. I've been working in elections in this town since before you were in diapers. You don't tell me, da, da, da. And I've always been here, and I've always stood right here, and no one has ever caused a problem. Sometimes the law has changed in the interim. Sometimes the law was just never enforced. It was as it was supposed to be, because you were just the harmless old coot who stood there and everybody knew you were just handing out sample ballots. But the law says you're supposed to be here doing it instead of there doing it. Or it's raining and I want to stand under the overhang. Is that such a problem? Everybody here knows me. I'm not causing an issue. Well, if the rule's the rule, then yeah, get an umbrella or go home. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. But then people get upset with you. And if your neighbors, locally, things sometimes get overlooked. But add guns to the mix, nobody's really going to appreciate that. Anyway, over to this other story from Philly.com. After the Delaware County raid, focus widens on voter registration group. What's going on here? You've probably already guessed. Days after state agents raided its Delaware County office, a national grassroots organization that works mostly for Democrats is facing increasing scrutiny over voter registration efforts in Pennsylvania. This story, by the way, just to give proper credit, by staff writers Caitlin McCabe and Angela Columbus, Columbis. Probably pronounced a lot like Columbus, too. Anyway, just here I am trying to give people credit and getting into pronunciation trouble already. A source with knowledge of the inquiry said Wednesday the probe of Fieldworks LLC is likely to expand to other spots in the state. At the same time, Delaware County officials are preparing to challenge thousands of voter registration forms submitted by the group, questioning if they were filed on time. A hearing on the matter is scheduled for Friday. Let's see. Both developments came after Pennsylvania State Police searched Fieldworks' office in Norwood last week, seeking, among other things, forms that could be used to, quote, construct fraudulent voter registration forms, unquote, according to court records. You're probably already getting the sense of what's going on here. We'll expound on this soon enough. Don't get frustrated. The Attorney General's office has declined to discuss its investigation or say if evidence suggests a plot to cast fraudulent ballots or just attempts by paid canvassers to artificially inflate voter registration numbers. Officials say it would be difficult for new registrants who used a false name to cast a fraudulent ballot because such voters must also provide identification that matches registration information. Fieldworks calls itself a grassroots political firm founded in 2001 to work with progressive advocacy organizations, federal and state Democratic campaigns, Democratic Party organizations, labor unions, and ballot initiative campaigns. In ads, it recruits hourly workers for fieldwork. It says that it is cooperating with investigators in Pennsylvania and has zero tolerance for fraud. In 2012, Fieldworks' voter registration efforts in Ohio sparked controversy when election officials flagged hundreds of dubious registration forms filed in Hamilton County, including one from a voter registered as John Adolf Hitler, which is always funny, except now. Stop laughing. Cincinnati police that year also arrested a former Ohio University student working for Fieldworks on charges of forging 22 signatures on a petition drive. Police at the time said Fieldworks played no role in the man's scheme to pad his list. The dispute now bubbling in Delaware County has less to do with the authenticity of voter registration forms than when they were filed. On Friday, the Delaware County Voter Registration Commission, a bipartisan board, which is supposed to make you feel better, but then, of course, if you're not voting for or refuse to vote for either of the major parties, or you're trying to start your own third party, you are saying, why is bipartisan automatically equivalent with fair? If it's bipartisan, at worst, or at best, all we can imagine is they know that it's in their own interest not to always backstab the other party over every single thing, because occasionally you're going to be accused of the same thing. But it would always be in their interest, for instance, to backstab any third-party challengers and keep this two-party dominance in place. That always needs to be in the back of your mind. But then again, we've also discussed that even if a third party were to rise to prominence and crush and snuff out one of the two parties, we'd probably revert back to a two-party system just the same, and the up-and-coming third party who becomes one of the two major parties will then do its best to crush any up-and-coming additional third parties, most likely. Anyway, we'll stick with the facts here, and as reported by Philly.com anyway. So, on Friday, the Delaware County Voter Registration Commission, a bipartisan board, will hold a hearing to determine if thousands of forms, many from Fieldworks, not all, but many, were submitted after the state's October 11th deadline to register to vote. It's amazing. Do you need a hearing on this? What date was this thing handed in? The 12th? Okay, then this is out. But is everything really always that black and white? No. Of course not. There will be ones. I filed this at 11:59 on October 11th. Yes, but the clock in the office was wrong. And it was really 12:01 on October 12th. And we have the atomic clock guy is here to prove it. I mean, who knows? Could be anything. According to Delaware County Solicitor Michael Madrin, the county received thousands of voter registration forms from the Pennsylvania Department of State on October 14th and 17th that had no dates or postmarks, which again, those things could have been turned in on October 9th and they got mailed out on October 10th, or they were hand delivered on the 10th and there was no postmark, and you figure, why should there be a postmark? I'm not posting it. I'm hand delivering it, except there's no official record of when you brought that in or whatever. Who knows what could have happened? There's always something. This is why, again, the law of large numbers is so fascinating. There's always going to be some damn stupid mistake somewhere. We don't have any indication that there were timely receipts here, says Mr. Madrin. A spokeswoman for the Pennsylvania Department of State said that when the state forwards any registration applications to the county, we attest to the fact that they were either postmarked or delivered in person by the deadline. Okay, so shouldn't that settle it? Apparently not. If they were not timely received here, we would not send them to any county, according to Wanda Murrin, the spokeswoman for the State Department or the Pennsylvania Department of State. A Fieldworks spokesman on Wednesday said the organization is also confident the forms, in packages with tracking numbers, were delivered to the Department of State before the deadline closed. The questions about the forms extend beyond their timeliness, Madrin says. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. County election officials who surveyed the forms, he said, also discovered some applications where individuals were registered to multiple addresses, or where registrants' social security numbers did not match their driver's license numbers. But Friday's hearing will focus exclusively on the timeliness issue, Madrin said. Now, what's of course more interesting is the story behind this, and the fact that I have more such stories, and we never did get to the one in Indiana, though I am aware of it being on the agenda one of the recent days on the after show. But just so we can be sure that we get to it, there's similar problems like this crop up all the time. And it's getting really annoying, to be honest, because it's a years-old problem here. People who conduct voter registration drives, even if they are organizations that chiefly work or even exclusively work with Democrats and Democratic campaigns, they are required by law, I believe everywhere, to register anyone who comes along and says that they want to register, regardless of their party affiliation or political beliefs, and really regardless of what information they put on those forms. Even when it's obviously fraudulent, the best you can do is you can flag it as suspect, and many states require that you do flag it as suspect and submit it in a different fashion. But you have to submit it nonetheless, and that's been a big problem with voter registration drives, mostly because of willful ignorance, about what they have to do and what they can and can't do. If a person comes along and says, I want to register to vote, and you got to give them the card. You give them the card and they write Joseph Adolf Hitler on it, and you say, this is obviously garbage. You can't just toss it, because then you're in trouble. Oh, voter registration volunteers are picking and choosing. They're throwing out certain kinds of registrations, but not other kinds of registrations. Yeah, they're throwing out the ones that say Joseph Adolf Hitler. Well, how do I know that they're not throwing out ones that are likely to be Republican voters and only keeping the ones that are likely to be Democrats? You don't. Not for sure. So you require that they all be submitted, and you can flag the ones that are obviously suspect. But of course that only leads to headlines the next day from Republican, Republican press releases from Republican operatives that say, thus and such a firm, who by the way only works with Democrats, just submitted 100 obviously fraudulent voter registrations. Well, yeah, they were obviously fraudulent. We flagged them as fraudulent, most likely fraudulent anyway, and we're required by law to submit them. Nonetheless, we did exactly as was required. And this was exactly the problem that came up with Acorn. And nonetheless, they managed not only to make Acorn look like they were knowingly registering people illegally, but they got Democrats in Congress to agree that was happening, and they defunded them and condemned their actions. In Indiana, we had similar problems recently, wherein, golly gee, the state of Indiana, Mike Pence, governor, by the way, raided the offices of a voter registration operation, making similar claims, right? Oh my gosh, we have to raid them because Donald Trump says this election is going to be rigged and there's going to be election fraud all over the place. And we just found out, wink, wink, that the people registering voters here in Indiana are, believe it or not, submitting to the state voter registration forms that are obviously fraudulent and that they know to be fraudulent. Well, again, they're required to. It's actually only going to be an issue if they intentionally submit ones that they know are likely to be fraudulent without saying that they're likely to be fraudulent. And if they did that, then you'd have something. Let me go to this here. I don't know whether I've discussed them, but I've noted in the past that this is happening in Indiana. Definitely discussed on the after show, or at least slated to be discussed that day. But here, I have a diary at Daily Kos from Murfster35. I always love having to announce people's crazy names here on the Kagro in the morning show, which is not my name. The Indiana voter suppression is not a scam. It's the real deal. More details emerge. What are we talking about here? Murfster writes it this way. I've taken this story to heart since the first time I read about the initial raid on the IVRP, the full name of which is not on the tip of my tongue here, but we're talking about the voter registration project. Maybe it's the Indiana Voter Registration Project. Anyway, the raid by the Indiana State Police on October 4th, which you likely heard about. For a long time, it was mostly ignored, and it was, I guess, only covered by Murfster, he says, and Meteor Blades and a couple of local papers giving it any life at all. But now it appears that it's finally starting to get more attention nationally. He turns to a Huffington Post article out that day being October 24th, showing just how flimsy the entire investigation is. Just to quickly recap for newcomers, on October 4th, working on information provided by a couple of county clerks about possibly faulty or fraudulent applications turned in, the ISP, Indiana State Police, executed a search warrant on the headquarters of Indiana Voter Registration Project. Good, we got it right. Seizing applications, laptops, paperwork, and even personal cell phones. They barred access to the office by an attorney during the raid, and they lined volunteers up against the wall. They expanded their investigation from 2 counties to 56, even though IVRP only had activity in 9 counties. The cracks started appearing in the cover story almost immediately. The ISP raided based on information by county clerks, but the IVRP insisted that they had followed the law and flagged about a dozen applications as being faulty, asking the clerks to inspect them as part of their process. So what's likely going on here? Oh, so certainly what's available to people who want to monkey with the situation is you go and you find one of these guys and you fill it out, Joseph Adolf Hitler, and you submit it, and then you call the county clerk and say, I have information that there are fraudulent applications being submitted by RVRP. Really? How do you know? Oh, an anonymous tip. But here's the information. I saw a person who filled one in that said Joseph Adolf Hitler. And you know that's fraudulent. But I'll bet you anything that they submit it because they love fraud there. Now, if you get the right kind of county clerk, they say, well, for one thing, I'm starting to think that you're the guy who filled that out. But for another, they're required to submit it one way or the other. And it's only an issue if they don't flag it as possibly fraudulent. And even then, it's not necessarily an issue because they may say, I don't know, the guy's name might be Adolf Hitler for all I know. But generally speaking, they will flag something like that, and no skin off their nose. If it checks out, fine, the guy gets registered. They know, they just flag these things. But you can certainly make trouble for people by, especially if you know that the voter registration drive is being held or being operated by people who typically work with Democrats. Or even if you think that they're neutral, but they might be registering more Democrats than Republicans because there are more new voters who want to be Democrats than want to be Republicans in the age of Donald Trump, certainly, and in the age of, I mean, who are these new registrants? Some of them, of course, will be people turning 18 years old. Others may be naturalized citizens. And guess what? One party's nominee keeps attacking naturalized citizens as others and likely fraudulent voters. And they're going to be pissed off about that. So what do? You just basically say, hey, whoever's doing the voter registration drive is crooked and they're trying to steal the election. And if the state's governor, let's say, is on that guy's ticket, what's going to happen? Right? Well, we need to stop. Look, the bulk of new registrants are going to be Democrats. We think we know this. So we may catch a few Republicans who have made valid registration requests, and we may catch them in the net. But on balance, it's going to be 99-1 Democrats. So what do? You allege that this stuff is happening. You allege that it's a criminal conspiracy to meddle in the election. And then everybody gets concerned because democracy is worth protecting, unless, of course, it means stopping this kind of garbage. And so you shut down the offices, and then who knows how many thousands of legitimate applications get frozen, but doesn't matter because as long as it's 99-1 Democrats, you just freeze them, and if the whole case falls apart, well, gee whiz, no problem. No harm, no foul. You'll be registered next time. Just not this time. Can't cast a ballot now, but hey, by the midterms, you'll have your chance to cast your ballot. Maybe. So, how easy is this to pull off? Well, I guess it's a pretty simple thing. Even if you don't fill out a card that says Joseph Adolf Hitler, again, the law of large numbers and statistics will tell you, you could pick up the phone blind and call any county in America and say, the people who are registering new voters have been submitting fraudulent applications. And if you get the right official, they'll say, oh my God, you're right. We should get the police and raid the place. And you'll be right. But you won't be right about their intent. But that'll take a trial to sort out. So just like Donald Trump's strategy of, hey, let's just throw everything in the mix and see what sticks and force the other side to litigate and spend, and maybe they'll give up. You can do the same with voter registration places. And then, of course, at some point they'll catch on and say, why do I bother? I want to register people to vote, but the only thing that happens is I end up getting arrested, even when I'm right. I keep getting acquitted, but I'm tired of getting arrested. Hopefully there's enough people who are not tired of it. Okay, so back to our Murphster 35 piece here. The cracks started to appear in the cover story almost immediately. The ISP, that Indiana State Police, not your internet service provider, rated based on information by county clerks, but the IVRP insisted that it followed the law, right? And that they had flagged about a dozen applications as being faulty, asking the clerks, please inspect this. In other words, they self-disclosed as required. Kind of sounds like a piss-poor way to go about committing voter fraud, putting a big bright red flag on it. And third-party registrars are registrants, are required to turn in every application. Oh, I see. Registrars, people who are registering new voters, required to turn in every application, like we said, that they collect to prevent applications from being discarded due to political preference. They must flag suspicious applications, which the IVRP clearly did. So, where's the fire? Turns out, there is none. The county clerks and even the Secretary of State admitted there was no clear evidence of fraud. Most of the glitches were inverted numbers or a blank or incomplete zip code or phone number. Dumbass human error, actually. Well, like I said, there's human error in everything. There were no applications that appeared to be made up out of whole cloth, but the Indiana State Police had an ace up their sleeve. It was an obscure, almost universally unpublished technical phrase that the ISP latched onto. To quote the article, Indiana law requires that a person who receives a voter registration application they have reason to believe is false, fictitious, or fraudulent, fraudulent submission. How's this? This seems to be phrased wrong, or maybe I've read it wrong. Indiana law requires person who receives a voter registration application they have reason to believe is false, or fictitious, or fraudulent, required to submit the application with a statement sworn or affirmed to under the penalties for perjury, setting forth the reasons why the person believes the application may be materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent. That's it. Period. An obscure clause that doesn't even appear on the Secretary of State voter registration handbook online, and is only mentioned in the registration handbook in one lousy county in the state. That's an interesting claim. How do you comply with a rule that nobody in the state tells you exists? And how does a volunteer submit a sworn statement under penalty of perjury that a registration is fraudulent when they have no proof, only the knowledge that it may contain inaccurate information? But there's one more golden nugget in the Huffington Post report. The Indiana State Police has no business being involved in this. Let me get to that in a second. But have I confused anyone here? Apparently, somewhere buried in Indiana law is if you are collecting voter registration forms and you think that there's one that is fraudulent, it's not enough to say, put them in a stack and put a rubber band around them. And when we hold them in, we say, here's the ones we think are okay, and here are the ones that we think you need to investigate as possibly fraudulent. And they usually say, thank you. That's great. You're supposed to do that. You've saved us a lot of trouble. Thank you very much. Instead, somewhere buried in the book somewhere is, there needs to be a sworn affidavit for each one of these. And though we've never required that of anybody, we are going to require that of you now. And I guess if it's on the books, it's on the books. But boy, that's annoying. Okay, so what about the Indiana State Police having no business being involved in this? Well, I guess another clip from the Huffington Post. It gets more complicated. Under the law, the state police don't seem to have a role in an investigation into potential fraudulent voter registration forms. Instead, it's up to the county election board to investigate before turning any findings over to a prosecutor. Do you believe this? Murphster continues. 5,000 to 10,000 confiscated applications, another 40,000 to 45,000 already turned in at jeopardy, and the Indiana State Police has no jurisdiction over this matter. John Stewart always says, if you smell BS, call BS. Of course, he says whatever he wants, so he says the whole word. And this is, of course, he says, pure, unadulterated BS. The capper is that Mike Pence at a rally in Iowa last week bragged about the partisan racist witch hunt his cops are on. The people of Indiana deserve better than this from their government. Thanks, as always, for reading, he says, and thank you for writing. I'll thank you. And so it's really been pretty amazing how many states this has happened in and how many elections this has happened in over the years. It's a little disconcerting. And of course, you know how we conclude our own articles here. Reporting direct from the Huffington Post on this one, by the way, was Ryan J. Riley's work. Here's an additional nugget not mentioned in the diary. Here in the headline, it says, Indiana officials target a black voter registration drive on a technicality. I don't think we heard that mentioned at all in the diary. How about that? But I find it rather amazing that that's happening here. It's happening in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and I guess probably all over the state of Pennsylvania and in numerous states all over the country. It's just a regular and expected, unfortunately, part of the conduct of the election. Every 4 years, somebody just alleges that if Democratic voter registration numbers look too threatening, you just shut the operation down by alleging something that you know will be found, but won't rise to the level of criminality. But in the interim, the time you spend finding out, what is this thing? Did it happen? Is it a violation of law? No, it isn't. Oh, well, too bad. Well, we stopped registering voters while that was going on, that little inquiry. Guess some of you just aren't going to be able to vote. Sorry. By the way, here's some breaking news. Rick Hasen, how does he pronounce his name? Hasen, Hasen. You know, you've probably been following along on Twitter. He's a professor of law and political science at UC Irvine. But Professor Hasen says, breaking news, federal court rejects Pennsylvania GOP's efforts to send poll watchers to different counties to look for voter fraud. Remember that when that was the plan, and they wanted to waive the laws that ordinarily prohibit you from watching polls outside of your home county. Well, I'm glad that's been dumped, and I'll share that with you as well. Let's see. A few other stories still coming along across the wires here. By the way, another comment from Kate Sherrill. In case you're working at the polls this year and you run into something like this, I'll share her story with you. You run into something like, I'm fine handing out literature here. No, you're not. You actually need to be 100 feet from the door. And very often if it's a contentious thing, conscientious poll workers will mark that 100-foot barrier and just say, look, all the electioneering has to be done past these signs, or in some cases, make a chalk mark on the line, on the sidewalk outside, whatever. But Kate says, by the way, she has run into people who are just pretty sure that they're allowed to be wherever the hell they want, or that the 100-foot line is here, or we always used to make it here, but now we don't. What's the story? She says, kill them with kindness. You offer them a chair to sit on, but you place it where they're supposed to be. That's a nice trick. It's worked in the past, so if you find yourself in a similar situation as a first-timer at the polls, you might consider something like that. Just thought I'd throw that one out there for your consideration. Okay. Other things that I have open and we need to at least acknowledge for the day. We do have some Trump news for you. I found this one racing by in the Twitter feed today. Trump Hotel Toronto, the Trump Toronto project, 4 years since its launch. Apparently, I guess, pretty much done this week and moving toward bankruptcy. This is a Politico piece that we can refer to. I don't think we need to comb through the entire thing, but a Trump tower goes bust in Canada. The failure this week of Trump Toronto showcased a familiar scenario, big promises, glitzy image, a Russian-born financier, weird, aggrieved smaller investors, but few losses for the mogul himself. This all centers on the 65-story, maybe, because he lies about how tall some of his buildings are, Trump International Hotel and Tower in Toronto. All the glitz and ambition of the luxury brand businessman with his name in giant letters near its spire. It's the tallest residential skyscraper in Canada, probably the fanciest. The hotel's sleek, cream and black interiors inspired by champagne and caviar. Every room features Italian Bellino linens and Nespresso coffee makers. So there you go. You know it's fancy. Guests can book a Trump experience, that's in caps, a Trump experience outing through the Trump Attaché Concierge Service. Their furry friends are eligible for the Trump Pets program, which will fill your best Fido's tummy with gourmet treats and see them off to sleep on a plush dog bed. Gosh, everything's luxury. They crap on gold leaf. I don't know. This Trump-branded and Trump-managed jewel is also, as a business venture, a bust. Because no one cares, right? On Tuesday, a Canadian bankruptcy judge placed the glass and granite building into receivership just 4 years after Trump and his children cut the ribbon at its grand opening. Launch party. Once it's auctioned off, whether or not Trump is the leader of the free world by then, his name may well vanish from its marquee. Okay, well, there's more to it, of course. Do they name who the Russian is? There we go. Trump is not the project's developer or even an investor. One of his partners, a Russian-born billionaire who got rich in Ukraine's steel industry, controls the firm that's actually in default. The Trump Toronto is still a posh hotel, and even though nearly 2/3 of the tower's condo units remain unsold, they're still upscale residences. Still, the saga of the property's glistening rise and rapid fall is classic Trump, featuring a tsunami of litigation and bitterness, money with a Russian accent, and a financial wreck that probably won't hit its namesake particularly hard. So who's the Russian behind it? Let's see. The project's owner, Talon International, led by Alex Schneider, this time spelled Schnaider. That's the steel magnate who is perhaps better known for buying a Formula One racing team and hiring Justin Bieber to sing at his daughter's Sweet 16. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. Okay, so keep an eye out, I guess, for more news about Alex Schneider, however he might pronounce that, and Justin Bieber, just in case he shows up in any of this. Okay, well, that story successfully squeezed in. And, well, there's a lot more, of course, and we have one more shot at this on Friday. Plus, of course, we'll record some closing arguments, I guess. More garbage about Trump, most likely, but also some of our overdue contributions from listeners all over the country. And they'll keep you company, hopefully Monday and Tuesday. Although, frankly, you should not be listening to the show on Tuesday. You should be out working at the polls, moving people gently beyond the 100-foot line, for instance, and making sure, most importantly, that everybody who is eligible to vote does get out and do so. So, we'll try and keep you company. Maybe we could do that, and you could listen to the podcast on your way to and from those various tasks. Would that be a fair deal? Hopefully I can get those things recorded for you, and you won't even hear too much of my plumbing problems coming through the microphone and bleeding through into the podcast. But we'll have to try and take care of that in the balance of the day. Thank you for standing by and listening to our Thrown Together program, but they're all thrown together. So you're used to that by now. I appreciate everyone, of course, hanging in there all the way through election season. Thanks to so many of you who have let us know in texts and emails and via Twitter, and probably carrier pigeon. I'm still waiting on those things. That the show has helped keep you sane through the election season. I think that's a remarkable accomplishment all by itself. So, getting ready to hand the microphones of Netroots Radio over to the after show guys, and it's Thursday, and I always want to start early on that because it's a chance to speak Italian. It's the Thank God It's Giovedì Thursday edition of the after show coming up next right here. Philippine leader Rodrigo Duterte, whose name always amazes me, calls the United States fools and monkeys for halting the sale of 26,000 rifles to his country. Gee whiz. It's almost like we know that they're dangerous items. At least 239 people died trying to escape to Europe while crossing the Mediterranean Sea just last week. And Germany reveals the truth about refugees and terrorism. Would be curious to find out what the truth actually is. On the last half, they'll be reporting on the FBI's launch of an investigation into its own Twitter account. And the FBI has based its Clinton Foundation case on, you know this, a debunked right-wing book written by
From
the
Daily
Swift
Coast
voters.
Radio on networksradio.com.
Or rather, written to Swift
You
vote
have
the
been
Clintons.
listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Thank you again, and thank you for listening through my stumbling through that. Yeah, you've all heard about the Clinton cash story, and you are likely aware by now, or you certainly will be after the after show is over, of its author's affiliation with Steve Bannon and Breitbart. Gee whiz, how could that have happened? Stay tuned and find out.